KK Kitchen.
Beef short ribs are full of connective tissue. The collagen in this connective tissue is tough and chewy. That is, until we convert it to gelatin by cooking the meat low and slow. For my braising liquid, I'm using a mixture of blonde chicken base and a special ingredient, mead. This mead was brewed with Marion berries and is similar in some ways to a fruit-forward wine like a Shiraz, but it has a noticeably viscous texture. The chicken base is optional but simple. First, separate 15 to 20 chicken wings at each of their joints. Slice, twist, slice, twist. Roast the wings at 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 204 degrees Celsius until they're light brown. Cover them with water and simmer them until the meat no longer tastes of anything. Why wings? Chicken wings are full of collagen and will, again, make for a luxurious, gelatinous texture in the stock. I mean, look, here's some of the leftover chicken base. It's like a chicken jelly. Add kombu, which is super savory dried seaweed, and allow it to steep for 10 minutes. You may notice that I added no aromatic vegetables like carrots or celery to this chicken base. That's because the delicate flavor of these aromatics would die if cooked for too long. Traditionally, stocks and braises call for aromatics right on the front end. Think, this chicken base took at least a couple of hours to extract. Celery, for example, would go bitter and bland if cooked for 2 hours. On to the short ribs. First, we're going to quickly sear the meat. Get a heavy braising pot nice and hot. My short ribs are pretty fatty, so I'm not adding oil to the pan. Sear the meat hard and fast on all sides. Work quickly. We're not actually trying to cook the short ribs here. Rather, we're trying to introduce some amazing roasted meat flavors that will ultimately exaggerate the flavor of the braised beef. Add an oxtail if you can get your hands on one. This cut is full of connective tissue because cows essentially wag their tails all day. The tail does a lot of work. Contrast that with the tenderloin, which rests on top of the cow its whole life. Reserve the excess fat from browning the meat and deglaze the pan with a glass of mead. Simmer the meat for 5 to 10 minutes to evaporate the alcohol. Then it's time to build the braise. Arrange the short ribs and oxtail in the pot and add your chicken base. Next, I'm adding some ingredients to make this braise very complex. First, a split pepper, which kind of tastes like paprika with a subtle rolling heat. Next, I'm adding a bit of Dijon mustard. This, I suppose, would be the secret ingredient in braised beef. Another common ingredient is Worcestershire sauce, which, if you're not familiar, is a fermented sauce of onions with a few curious ingredients like clove, tamarind paste, and anchovies. As an homage to Worcestershire sauce, I'm adding a bit of tamarind paste and a teensy tiny bit of clove. Be careful with clove. It's probably one of the strongest spices in the kitchen. Now we can start the initial braise. Scientifically speaking, you should never trust a recipe that calls for braising at temperatures higher than 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius. It's in these lower temperature ranges that the collagen gelatinizes. At higher temperatures, you run the risk of boiling the meat. In medieval times, it was an insult to call somebody a boiler, which basically means that somebody is a really bad cook. At the same time, braising is very tricky because home ovens are inconsistent, especially at low temperatures. So, if you're worried about cooking at such a low temperature, you can go a bit higher. 200 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 93 to 121 degrees Celsius. In any case, you can expect at least 4 to 6 hours of braising at the very least for the collagen to break down and the meat to be tender. Meanwhile, I do have some aromatics for my braise. First is the parsnip, which is a very underrated root vegetable that tastes like a cross between carrot and celery. I'm peeling my parsnip and cutting it into planks. These planks will ultimately be seared and added to the final braise. At the point when the short ribs are starting to pull away from the bone, I'm going to turn them over in the liquid and add my aromatics. Sauté the parsnip to bring out its flavor. Do the same with shallots, which are the ultimate for sauce. I'm using the reserved beef fat for this, by the way. Add the parsnips and shallots to the pot along with a generous amount of garlic. Then, scoop out and add the pulp of a couple of tomatoes. This pulp is very savory. Later, the meat is wonderfully tender and ready to serve. As you can see, the texture I achieved is definitely gelatinous, but it still has that snap to it. Tender, but not mushy. Fish out the ribs and the parsnips and strain the liquid. Then, bring the liquid to a boil, dial it back to a simmer, and allow it to reduce to your desired consistency. When it's time to eat, all you really have to do is rewarm the meat and vegetables and bring the sauce back to a simmer. Make sure to season everything really well. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the plating. First, I've got some creamy polenta with piquillo peppers and parmesan. Then, the parsnip plank, which acts as a delicious pseudo-bone for the beef. Here comes the crowning achievement, that absolutely incredible short rib. Next, little asparagus tips that were simply sautéed with some lemon. I'm also adding the tender nuggets of meat from the oxtail. Spoon on that rich sauce. Finally, I'm grating on a bit of fresh horseradish and some blood orange just for a zesty kick. And there you have it. Short ribs that are both comfy and refined. Serve these at your dinner party and you'll be MVP.